Welcome, Mr. Buckley.
Welcome to you, sir. This is kind of my store, so
this is your store.
You. Amazing.
For all the viewing audience and those listening, this is the official launch of From the Butcher's Block right here at the Ventura Meat Company in Ventura, California. And I'm excited about this show. We're going to be carrying this through for months on end.
Yeah. No, we talked a little bit in the pre-show phase about just the wide array of things that we can talk about, and we'll have a little bit of direction and things like that, but largely I think it's going to be an off-the-cuff kind of approach. I mean, we have got a few talking points here, but let's just see where it all takes us, and that always works out well for me.
No, I totally agree with that, and we're going to hopefully get some feedback from the viewing audience during the show and post-show each month. The concept here is to take 2 hours of our evening and talk about things that matter to us in the worlds of meat and nutrition and commerce.
Right.
I think we're going to have a wide array. Each month we'll put out the topics ahead of time and get people to try to tune in, give us some Q&A, answer their questions right ahead of time.
I like that you said commerce, because that's something that I feel we do talk a lot about around here. Things like where prices come from and stuff like that. And it's such an interesting thing, about not just the Ventura Meat Company or buying stuff from a butcher shop, but doing business with a small business in general, I think gets you closer to the ground level about ideas like where do prices come from and things like that. So here's hoping that we can really make it a very wide scope.
I'm on board with that. I'm going to let you drive the show a good portion of time. Again, like you said, This is your shop, but I think we have such an opportunity here to talk about what's in the case, how the butcher shop came about.
Right.
We're going to be able to talk about supply chain and sustainability and marketing. Right. We're going to bring in some guest hosts down the road, maybe some ranchers, some foodies, and really just try to tackle this meat thing from all angles possible, including what's on your plate, how it got there, what it tastes like, how to cook it, where to store it. We got Megan over here. We haven't introduced the hands on the picture-in-picture window, but Megan is hacking away at this beautiful chuck right now.
Yeah.
And we're going to be doing some demos, too. So that leads us right into an opportunity where this is an educational platform as well.
I hope so. Yeah. So, well, let's just talk right now. I mean, about what she's doing. And, I said before, I promised her we wouldn't do a play-by-play of what's going on over there. But she is dealing with a chuck. I mean, it's not a square cut chuck, which is a very big primal. It's been broken down relatively, and now we're going to do some short ribs. We got a lot of ground beef to make tomorrow, so most of it will be a deboning scenario. But she's making some short ribs right now,
which is exciting. Again, we're trying to give people a new perspective on what their meat is, what's on their plate.
Yeah.
The tagline of the show is a web show that serves only the finest quality perspective.
Amazing.
That's wide-reaching. But we're going to focus on meat and the shop for a while in the very beginning and the inception of this show. And so with that said, Michael, why don't you give us a little history? How did this shop come about? Why is the Ventura Meat Company a physical entity serving the community now?
Well, I've lived in Ventura for 6 years, so this definitely wasn't a thing where, I started out with an idea of I want to open a butcher shop. Where do I do that? I think sometimes you see scenarios like that, and it makes consumers skeptical of that sort of capitalism. But that's not really where it comes from. About 3 or 4 years ago, I really started changing the way that I conduct myself, and that means food, that means lifestyle, that means a very broad scope of things. And Ventura's got a lot of great resources for great locally raised vegetables, and just if you're trying to eat properly, man, if you can't do it here in Ventura, as far as I'm concerned, that's a you problem.
I totally agree with you. I mean, when you think about the agricultural footprint and the impact of Ventura County on the rest of the nation, we are one of the most biodiverse locations in the country, if not the world. We can actually support the 5 major biomes of the entire globe and planet right here in this community. But like you said, it's not just about agriculture in the produce and plant standpoint. We have a lot of great areas for the cattle and the livestock agricultural component.
Absolutely. And so as I progressed and I, maybe went farther down the rabbit hole of really changing the way that I eat, and I think that's a really good stepping stone for anybody that's looking to change that, if you just exercise a little bit, you can eat whatever you want. And I think most people have tried that, and it's really not that good of an approach. So for me personally, I started to realize that if real changes were going to happen, it needed to start in the kitchen, and it needed to start in the refrigerator, and it needed to start at the grocery store.
And I think most people would agree with you in the sense that the kitchen is a communal location.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got Thanksgiving coming up in a month. How many people end up chatting away their day in the kitchen, or starting their evening post-work together, prepping some kind of meal?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that just really started to progress into how do I make these changes? What are the resources that I can use here locally to make these changes in my life? And I knew they had to be broad. But like I said, vegetables and things like that were pretty easy to find. The farmer's market has a lot of great options in that regard. But the thing that kept popping up was like, well, where's the good meat? Where is that?
Well, we must have been having an epiphany at some moment in time before we knew each other. The stars and the energies were aligning, because there was a moment where my wife and I, Bree, were sitting around the table, and I said, I want a butcher shop. I want to go to a butcher shop. And she's like, well, okay. We had a couple options at the time. Those didn't remain nameless.
I think that's a good idea.
But ultimately, I had this vision, the old world butcher shop vision of hanging sausages in a cooler case, a stocked meat case, and guys in paper hats leaning over the counter telling me about their day and about what I should be taking home, the finest cuts that they know about. And we didn't have that, but within short work, it was only within a couple of weeks of me coming up with this drive and desire that you were opening your doors.
Right.
So we popped in, and I said, let's try this place out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the hanging sausages yet. It's down the pipeline.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
You accommodated all the other needs that I had.
Well, I certainly hope so. And, largely what I've tried to do here is use my consumer instincts, because that may be one of the most genuine things about what this place is it's what I wanted. Coming from a consumer standpoint of where is that aspect of my nutritional needs,
and flavor needs, for that matter.
Oh, absolutely. And that's sort of the silver lining. This wouldn't work if it didn't eat. I say that all the time. We can rest on our laurels and think about all the things that we do properly in terms of sourcing locally and buying from smaller ranchers and ideas like that. But if you take it home and it doesn't eat, well, this place wouldn't have been open for going on 2 years. So that's really the origin, was as a consumer, this is what I wanted, and I thought, Ventura on the whole could benefit mutually, not just from, me owning a small business and having that be my job, which is a blessing that I can't even begin to describe. But I really do view this as not just mine, but it belongs to the people of Ventura, because we really needed this.
Sure. And, definitely unique to Ventura, but this is a model that we see all across the country as a small independent butcher shop. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to get your take in terms of the word butcher nowadays and what that means to you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think this type of shop is either in a small neighborhood across the country, or people are asking for it somewhere in a small neighborhood across the country. Ultimately, though, do you think that the word butcher, the role of a butcher, is a lost art?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would point out is that, as far as the definition of the word butcher goes, I'm not one of those. It's very specific, and it has to do with the harvesting of the animal, and we don't do that here.
I like how you did a little air quotes, the harvesting, the bunny ears, because we just had this conversation the other night. We came off of our event, our collaborative event, The First Cut.
That's right.
Which is an educational series right here in the Ventura Meat Company once a month. And we talked about the concept of harvesting and the sensitivity that people have. And I say that with a certain amount of jest and angst.
Yeah.
But ultimately, people have this blind eye. And, let's put it out there, too. We forgot the fine print disclaimer, everyone. This may be a controversial show occasionally. But I think people have a blind eye to where their food's coming from, what it's about.
Right.
And harvesting as a term was one of those things we debated on.
Right.
Ultimately, it is the animals are being slaughtered. They're butchered.
That's exactly right.
You can't get meat in a case without breaking down an animal.
You guys can see in the picture that's somewhere right up in the right-hand corner there, or even in the big frame, this is animal flesh. Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's stop walking on eggshells about this. I do firmly believe, our industry, and it's not just meat, it's food, needs transparency. And that only comes to be when consumers ask for it. If the only metric that we're concerned with is how much is it going to cost me at the checkout, well, that's a narrow field of vision. Ask more questions than how much is that, or what's the price per pound. And of course, those are answers that you need to have because everybody's got a budget. But having that narrow field of vision, in my opinion, has led to a lot of the unfavorable practices that we don't like, about keeping a large number of animals in a very small area. If there's transparency, if consumers are asking for answers about those things, it goes away.
Sure.
Industry wants to make money. They want to sell the products they're producing. So, it's no different than any other industry at that point.
And those conversations are part of what fueled the Ventura Meat Company's inception as well. And I apologize for anyone who is watching me dip out of frame, but it takes a lot of tasty beverages to cut meat and beer. There's nothing wrong with beer and beef together. I think it's an age-old thing that
I agree with that.
We want to make sure gets acknowledged. But ultimately, the shop is here to serve a need. And when we talk about that harvesting of animals and the ultimate kind of dinner plate focus, you as the shop owner,
right?
And you mentioned you're not really a butcher,
right?
But people's generic perception is that you are a butcher.
Absolutely, this is a butcher shop.
It's a butcher shop. Yeah. Is that debating that terminology though? Is that part of why it's the Ventura Meat Company instead of the Ventura Butcher Shop?
No. The reason it's the Ventura Meat Company is I just thought it would be easy to remember.
TVMC.
Yeah. I almost think that it's one of those things. It's like, hey, what's the name of that
meat company in Ventura?
Oh, it's the Ventura Meat Company. So the name of the business is largely just a marketing convenience. And I played around with a lot of different names and things like that. I mean, we even started out, I have opinions about the way that seafood is sourced as well. Regulation ended up being the dictator in that we can't do seafood right now. There's just a different set of parameters, and it's really another thing that we could just go down that road and have a deep conversation about it.
I'm not sure, but if I had my crystal ball, I imagine at some point there will be a segment on seafood and regulation.
We have to do it.
Probably 2 separate shows, actually. Seafood and regulation.
Seafood regulation and seafood and regulation.
There you go.
But no, we even one of the initial versions of the business plan was the Ventura Meat and Seafood Company. And I thought largely, even if we get into seafood, people can assume, seafood is meat.
There you go. You're in my dome right now. You're reading my mind because ultimately, in terms of animal flesh, if we want to get down to brass tacks, if you're cooking and serving animal flesh of some manner, it's meat. Whether it's fish meat, cow meat, pig meat. And we're going to probably get down this road eventually numerous times. But
definitely,
when we look at terminology, that's one thing we're going to define and discern episode in and episode out. Beef is a made-up term for people to feel more comfortable with the fact they're eating cow flesh. So is pork versus pig.
That's right.
And I know we're going to get into this. I'm waiting for these people to come barreling through the door for the simmering pork butt so we can have these kind of conversations live with an audience.
Right.
But you and I, we're going to be able to fill this time for months on end regardless.
Hey, look, one of the easiest things about my job is running my mouth. I'm very opinionated. I don't think you really get where I am if you don't have some conviction, and I don't think people want to do business with somebody that doesn't have conviction. And I'm not gonna put a wedge in between people and myself. I know where the lines are, but when it comes to what this business is about, I'm not afraid of expressing my convictions and things like that because that's how it got here. That's where these walls came from. And it's why you see this glass here. that's why the walls are 4 feet high. There's a philosophy to every nook and cranny here, and I won't apologize for them, and I'm happy to elaborate on every inch of this place.
So let's dig into that a little deeper then. Focusing on that concept of conviction and your philosophy. Again, just to touch back on the terminology, we do actually have in Ventura County a slaughterhouse, a butcher shop. You're largely, I think you probably agree, a meat cutter.
Yes.
But you're moving more into primal production. You're bringing in sides of a cow, steer, and you're starting to break that down.
Yeah.
Both of those moves have, again, a certain level of conviction and a philosophy as to why you're progressing the way you are. Give us your take a little bit on your role, not only in the community, but in the shop physically.
Yeah. I think, first thing is the place you're talking about in Santa Paula, Old Fashioned Country Butcher. I know Kent Short, and, we speak on occasion, and I do buy beef that goes through his facility. The last thing I want to do is really, I don't know enough about what his philosophies are to represent that.
Nor would you want to probably battle against his craft.
Of course,
there's definitely a defining line between taking a live animal through the gate and dispatching it accordingly versus bringing in a side of beef that's already dressed and ready to go for breakdown into portion cuts.
Yeah, and I think as you get closer to that part of the production process, like we are doing, we're inching closer to it every day. You gain even more respect for it, and I have a.
And it's not for everyone.
No, it isn't. I have a wealth of respect for what goes on at Old Fashioned Country Butcher, and I think all of us that live here in Ventura County need to pay more attention to how lucky we are to have a USDA processing facility in such close proximity. It will drive down our costs. There are not a great deal of USDA processing facilities, not only in the United States, but in California. And as you can imagine, shipping costs make their way down the food chain to consumers.
Pun intended.
Pun totally intended. So, yeah, I really have a great deal of respect for what goes on in the old-fashioned country butcher. I feel like it's sort of a quarterback running back scenario where we get the ball handed off to us, and then we deliver the product to the consumers, and we try to not waste, don't waste this stuff. It is animal flesh.
I think that's a great analogy, though, because when you're looking at the relationship between the two, as we mentioned, there's a respect there for his craft and his expertise. That directly impacts your product and how you convey the message of what's been brought to the table, or to the counter, to your customers. If it weren't for individuals like Kent dispatching the animals, dressing them accordingly, and getting that product ready in a very short amount of time, you wouldn't have the highest quality product, and you wouldn't be able to educate your consumers on where it came from.
Bingo. We have a business relationship, even though I don't have any invoices that say, old-fashioned country butcher or anything like that. I do buy this beef from a local rancher, Carpenter Cattle Company. We kind of we're supporting the koozies here. Hey, Steve.
Tune in, buddy, because your green koozies are making their way into the first broadcast.
That's right. And if anybody else joins us tonight, everybody gets a free koozie. We probably should have mentioned that. We didn't mention the koozies.
We may mention that again, because there's nothing like mass marketing and bringing in swarms of people other than a good koozie.
That's right. Absolutely. So to expound a little more on that about, the philosophies that we have here, I know that they're the right ones, and we're getting to a point that, we don't have to be salesmen anymore about that. I think the quality has made its way out into the market, and people understand, like I said before, the philosophy is one thing, but if you take this home and it doesn't eat, we're done here.
Sure.
But the good news is that the way that the ranchers we buy from do their business is in accordance with just the natural process of, cows eat grass. That's all they do is roam around and eat grass. And when you find ranchers that aren't interested in giving their cows grains, and again, that's another bracket altogether.
Stay tuned, folks.
But, Mother Nature knows exactly what she's doing. So when we get into the conversation of, well, are you sure that the grass-fed beef's better than the grain-fed beef? Well, you either trust Mother Nature or you don't.
And I think ultimately, if nothing else, the proof's in the pudding, just to keep throwing out these food puns and terms. But
a bunch of them.
The stuff that's on your plate and in your refrigerator is the same stuff you're selling in the shop. You're not giving us a bundle of goods.
Well, if for no other reason, because I pay wholesale prices, is it be cheap? It's cheaper for me to eat from here than it is to go to a restaurant.
But
or
it's
anything.
much more delicious.
It's absolutely more
and
delicious.
And it's healthier.
Yeah, and my life has gotten a lot better since I opened the shop for a myriad of reasons. But hey, if for no other reason, because I do get very nutritious, delicious food, and if anybody's interested in what I eat and how often I eat it, I'm more than happy to tell you. You know what? For breakfast, it's usually bacon and eggs, and here I am.
Would it be fair to say, Michael, that you and Megan and Anthony, the really foundation of the Ventura Meat Company, day in and day out, are stewards of livestock and the protein and meat in the case? Do you feel like you're really doing those animals justice from slaughter to market?
If I thought we weren't, then we would really reevaluate what we do and how we do it. We really try to do our best to not be salesmen. I don't want to, I don't want to be a salesman. I don't really want to talk people into things or talk people out of things. I tell these guys all the time, don't sell, connect.
Sure.
Talk to people about what it is we're doing and why we're different. But markets are driven by consumers, and we are at the whim of consumers. So, at the end of the day, that really is what dictates this. And we talked about it a little bit at our first cut class on Thursday when we got into things like the loin and whether or not it becomes T-bones and porterhouses or whether or not it becomes a New York strip and a filet.
Totally market driven, right?
Customers decide those things. So we start with how to source, and we start with our basic philosophies. But at the end of the day, what's in the case is what we know we can sell, and that's because consumers, they drive that.
I think one thing we're hinting at is the educational component of the shop. And, I'm distracted a little bit over here watching Megan break down this chuck, but there's a level of care there. She's checking the marbling. She's checking your cuts. She's really honing in on, the best handling of that chuck so that you get prime portion cuts out of that. A consumer that walks through the door, any customer, especially if it's their first time, they may not have an awareness of the shop. They may not know what's in the case.
Yeah.
Your first line of not even defense, first line of offense in the advocacy of quality meat is education, right? You need to explain to them about the case and what takes place behind the counter.
If there's one thing that I underestimated above all, it is the scope of education that we have to do.
Did you think people were just going to come in and buy beef?
Well, not so much that. It's not fair.
Well,
it's not fair.
I don't say that as a dig to you, but I mean, ultimately, when there are a lot of people that mindlessly walk into a grocery store, they look at what the portion cut is in cellophane and styrofoam, they say, oh, T-bone, oh, filet, and they walk out the door with whatever is pre-UPC'd.
And when I say it's not fair, I mean it's not fair to customers, because I did so much research. I mean, you can't just wake up one morning and say I'm going to open a business, and then 2 weeks later you're wheeling and dealing. This was probably about a 3 or 4 year time span from putting pen to paper to opening the doors, and I'd have it no other way. But like I said before, this was largely, I built this place with myself in mind as a consumer, and I was an educated consumer. So I think we're getting into something interesting here, and it's something I'd like to talk a little bit about in terms of this shop is a petri dish in regards to the fact that we are, first and foremost, maybe just a butcher shop, maybe just a retail meat place. But then we also sell grass-fed beef. And I know for a fact there are people that come here looking for just a good steak. They don't care about grass-fed beef. They just want something that tastes good.
And it cooks well.
And it cooks well, right. So a lot of the, maybe the inner workings and the philosophies and things, people just, and it's not a percentage or anything like that. It's just a matter of fact. Some people just want to stop buying stuff at the grocery store because it's not very good. So that's where the learning curve gets a little steep, in that, we've got to pitch like, hey, this is grass-fed beef, and you know what? You don't have to trim the fat because there's a lot of nutrients in there.
And I'd say just to be full disclosure, I was one of those customers. Again, I was searching for a butcher shop, but I grew up in the Midwest.
Right.
I ate grain-fed beef for a long time. And, on some level, grain-fed beef is delicious. And I'd say it's largely because of the grain. Well, what do you get out of grain? Sugars, sweetness, fattening, great marbling.
An unbalanced ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s.
Which is probably another show. But ultimately, although I'm sitting next to you at this countertop as a co-host of From the Butcher's Block, trying to educate people about what the Ventura Meat Company does and what's in the case, I'm learning along the way. And I think it's a continual process because I am not an end-all, be-all or an expert on every animal you bring through the shop and why it's healthier and why it tastes better. But I continue to build a relationship with you and understand that grain-fed versus grass-fed has a certain kind of compact with people that I'm dining with.
Right, or the environment. Let's face it, it wasn't an accident for grains to begin to be fed to cattle. This was tactical, and you can start to go down the rabbit hole. There's so many times where I say to people around here, this is a red pill, blue pill scenario. If you really start to peel back the layers on what industrial farming does and what it is and the real impact, it's not a fun story, and it's something that once you start to educate yourself, there's no turning back. So when I say it's not fair, I mean that I came from an educated standpoint, and I used myself as maybe the prototypical customer, and that's what's not fair.
Sure.
Because there are a lot of people that come here that don't.
And you say that, though, ultimately because you feel like you had a little leg up in your perspective and your education on what you're looking for?
Oh, absolutely. This is what I wanted to buy, and this is the type of place that I wanted to buy from. So that's what's not fair is that I'm not the prototypical customer. We have a lot of people that just want a good steak. Don't really care where it comes from. Don't care how it's produced. And you know what? That is perfectly acceptable because we can be that too. I say all the time, it doesn't matter where you're coming from in terms of why you want to shop here. That's what's been such an education for me as the owner, as the operator, so to speak, is that it doesn't matter where you're coming from, whether it's I'm concerned about the impact that industrial farming has on the environment. I'm concerned about, the way animals are treated in an industrial farming context. Or I want food that is nutritionally dense. Or maybe I just want something that tastes good. We actually end up covering every single one of those bases. That's what's unique.
Excellent. I love your segue, too, because I'm going to lean over my shoulder just for a second, and we're going to focus on your logo and what this means to, again, those philosophies we were just talking about. Yeah. Around the logo, we have local, grass-fed, sustainable, and wild. Yeah. Now, we're going to get into it in a future segment tonight, as a matter of fact, about some of the things you carry in the case. Yeah. But those four statements, those four kind of foundation or pillars of your shop, let's talk about those.
Sure.
Tell me about the grass-fed component. Let's start in the right-hand corner.
Grass-fed beef is the reason that I built this store. There are no two ways about it. That is what was missing in the market. And it's so massively important. I think, the organic chicken and the pasture-raised pork and all that, trust me, I love it. But, if you want to put a pin drop on one of the big problems in industrial farming, it is the feedlot scenario. Okay. Beef, I should say grain-fed beef.
Hashtag it's what's for dinner.
Exactly. It dominates the market, and it still does. Americans eat more beef than anything, and then we got all these studies coming out. Red meat's bad for you, and it's going to put you in the grave, and all this stuff. Well, maybe Americans aren't getting the message on that because they still eat a lot of beef. But what they're eating most of is the industrial processed beef, the grain-fed beef, the feedlot beef. So, if there is one reason that I built this store, it's to provide grass-fed beef. Hopefully it's locally sourced, and I'm happy to say that it is.
And let's touch on that real quick before we go too far. the upper left-hand corner of the logo is local.
Right.
Define your local parameter. What does that mean to people? When I say I bought my beef that's been sourced locally,
Right.
what's that radius or what's that definition?
I hope that local to some people means that, I'm supporting a locally owned business.
Okay.
And I, getting into an economic sort of realm of this conversation, boy, it's just good to support local businesses.
Well, and just for another shameless friend plug, our friend Kat Merrick of Totally Local VC would be all over this topic because shifting 10%, and she always talks about this, just 10% of your food spending has an enormous financial impact to your town. I mean, we're talking 6 to 7 figures depending on the size of your town.
Totally right. Hey, look, Megan's job didn't fall out of the sky.
You created it right here at the Ventura Meat Company.
Well, I had help creating it because people come in and they buy stuff from me. And so the first thing that local means is that, I've lived in Ventura since 2006. And I do call this place home, and I've got a lot of passion about what goes on here in the community, and I hope that I can help make it a better community. So that's the first thing that local means to me. And then, I kick that on down the line, and I make sure that I'm doing the same thing. Because at the end of the day, you're buying stuff from me, I'm buying it from somebody else. I will always do my best to try and find a proper local source within reason.
And we acknowledge the fact that it's not always convenient, or the product you're looking for may not be in the market locally.
Well, here we go. Pheasants are cold climate birds.
Yeah, and if you have customers asking for pheasant or wild duck or alligator, by default, it's not going to be available in this area. I've never seen an alligator going down Main Street.
You're not looking hard enough. But so that's what local means to me. And as a consumer, I try to do my best, and as a business owner, I also try to do my best. There are market demands that make it unrealistic for us to find the most locally sourced chicken. We sell a lot of chicken, and we got to go to Fresno to find a source that provides enough chicken for us to keep in our.
But I think ultimately Fresno, if we want to get into the geographic breakdown, is not that far away. It's a couple of hours. Right. It's better than sourcing chickens from Iowa or somewhere else, right? So
it really is. It really is. So, but this is where it gets really interesting, because I will say to people, we get the question all the time, and maybe we need to do more educating here in the shop and things like that. But, where does this come from? And one of my knee-jerk reactions is, well, let's be very clear. How we source is infinitely more important than where we source.
Okay, let's talk about that. Tell me what you mean.
The joke that I always give out is, if a guy's raising pigs across the street and feeding them battery acid, I'm not buying those pigs.
And let me tell you, folks, pigs will eat just about anything.
I kind of wonder how a pig would taste if it ate.
I just had just to derail us for a moment. I just had a conversation yesterday. I was in talking to my printer for my company T-shirts and race shirts, and we went down this road of pigs and their feed.
Yeah.
He went on this long tangent about the days of the mafia and casinos, and how the rumor is they used to feed people to pigs in the desert.
I've got no problem believing that, actually.
I think I'm on board with the logic there. Ultimately, though, bacon still tastes delicious. I don't know what they're eating, but it tastes delicious. So let me get back. Bring us back there.
Sure. So we'll jump over to the. Yeah, we covered local. We covered grass fed, and I think those two things.
Before we get too far away, though, real quick with the local too, Michael, I want to recap especially for us specifically with this show, the California perspective. Even if local doesn't mean within your county.
Yeah.
What is there a defined radius? Is there an actual regulation that says what local means from a government standpoint?
Well, I honestly, I don't know, and I sure hope not, because, gosh, there is this is a very rabbit hole topic in and of itself. Got a lot of food laws. I think there's a misperception that every complication or every
Okay.
Because then that's going to be a labeling thing and things like that, and a rabbit hole of a conversation.
So at minimum, we could maybe say that state sourcing and state pride would be an acceptable local focus.
What do you want as a consumer? I mean, we said earlier, whether or not a loin becomes New York strips or filet mignon is up to you. So, be a little more discerning. I've often said there is no better regulator of a market than an educated consumer. Ask me where this stuff is from, and if it's not good enough for you, then
don't buy it.
Then don't buy it. Nobody is turning your arm saying you have to buy something that comes from Nebraska. Nobody's turning your arm saying you have to buy something that's from Sacramento. If you want better, ask for it with your dollar.
Sure. I'm on board with that. So let's talk about real quick the sustainable and the wild components of your logo, and then we'll probably take a quick break and come back and talk about how to navigate the shop a little bit.
So sustainability, very broad definition.
And a buzzword nowadays. It
totally is, and we try to do that as often as we can. With beef, we are doing it exclusively. So that's where sustainability rests in terms of livestock processing here in the shop and inside of these walls. Past that, sustainability in a livestock setting can mean a great deal of things. Not producing so much livestock that it compromises what the local ecology is able to sustain.
And keying in on that word ecology, because I think you would totally endorse the premise that an environment and an ecology of an area has a threshold.
Oh, I would think so, yeah.
And at some point, if you're, especially when we're talking about livestock, if you're raising more livestock than the land can sustain,
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah, sustain is the root word there, and started to become an unsustainable scenario when we got into the feedlot scenario, when we started with the grains, and then that's just not what cows have evolved to thrive on. So
I've never seen a cow wandering through a soybean or a wheat or a rye field.
Yeah,
in my experience, goofed off a little bit during this broadcast, but natural obligate diet. I agree with you. I think people should familiarize themselves with that set of words.
What does that mean? What do you feed your cat? Your cat's an obligate carnivore. If you're the food you're feeding it, I'm sorry, if it's got corn and soy in it, you're gonna have problems.
The cat is not eating that out on its own. If it were to escape your apartment or your house and live on its own for 2 weeks, it's not looking for the next closest
not at all
grain bag.
No, it's
and I think it's the same with the cows.
Well, right. I mean, yeah, not that they're obligate carnivores, but
no, but that would be interesting. I mean, considering we're coming close to Halloween.
Well, I think it's called mad cow disease. Actually, I think we tried that. So that's where the sustainability really starts to become a very broad idea. And I'll just go in one more realm in terms of pork production, because pigs are, as we touched on, they will eat just about anything. And that's okay. So I don't really draw the line on pigs eating grains or
it's not as strict and harsh of a threshold you have to deal with.
So the sustainability, the way that it applies here, is that we look for farms that are not outsourcing that food. They're growing the pork, the Salmon Creek pork that Megan's cutting up right now, the pork belly and the pork butt to go into sausage. These pigs are finished on a high quality barley, and I can tell you that it's grown on the same farm as the pigs are. So there's not trucks of feed coming from another place and really disrupting the sustainability of it all. And they can't grow more pigs than they can feed with the barley that's grown on the farm.
It totally makes sense.
It's a cycle. It's sustainable. And you can do it for as long as you want to do it, because that's what Earth does.
And I'd have to imagine some of the viewing audience right now would be asking themselves in regards to this.
Wait, there's people watching this?
Well, I'd have to defer to the engineer on that one, but my thumbs up says yes. When we're talking about the sustainability of a ranch or a farm that's raising these animals and the livestock, to be clear, you're not actually out there with like a bullet point list or a certification. But there have been times where you've gone out to a ranch and you've seen their operation. You've kind of gotten a feel for what they're about. And that's, you do kind of a gut check, right, on whether or not you feel that they're meeting some standards that you personally would endorse or be weary of.
I think one thing that I would try to convey to just about anybody that's interested in shopping here, learning more about what we're trying to do here is, maybe this sounds a little arrogant, but I have some pretty high standards about what I put in my body. And I am the first filter. And I don't want to say, hey, if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for you. But my standards are pretty high. That's why you don't find Coca-Cola here. Gosh, it'd be so easy to do something like that, just to create another revenue stream, to make it easier to pay the bills. But it's an integrity thing. And I hope that means at least something to customers, that they come in and they don't see a Coca-Cola refrigerator or something like that. I don't want to put those things in my body. I'm not going to sell them to you just to make money doing it. So the standards that we maintain are of the highest variety. And you can really, unfortunately, prices do tell you something. Soy and corn and things like that, they're heavily subsidized by the government. And that's why they're so prevalent in livestock feed and crackers and all kinds of stuff. And Coca-Cola, like I said, the reason that they're in there is because they're cheap ingredients. So you know what? The premium price tag actually tells you something.
Sure.
It tells you that those largely subsidized feed ingredients, they're not there.
Well, and just to wrangle us a little bit before we go to break, drawing us back to the original kind of vision of this show, you say you wouldn't want to push on people the premise that if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for them.
No.
But I think there's value there. Eating or my hair or whatever it may be in the hands of an expert. I'm not a barber. I'm not a butcher. I'm not a mechanic. I can't change my own oil. I mean, I could if I did a little research. I choose not to. I choose to put it in the hands of an expert.
Outsource that.
And so for you to say you're the first line of defense and you're in the bar, and I say you went to school to cut hair, make me look the best you feel.
Right.
I come into the shop and I say, I want the best
you didn't
quality.
Go to school to do this.
Yeah. So ultimately, I'm not at home breaking down my own side of steer.
Right.
I want you to do that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't discount, just for my own personal plug as a friend, don't discount that philosophy of what's good enough for you should be good enough for other people.
I appreciate that sentiment, and I definitely taking care of myself very seriously, because it doesn't do any good for the Ventura Meat Company, if I'm walking around carrying 50 extra pounds. I do eat.
It does. It diminishes your credibility just a little bit.
It definitely does. And, I have asserted from day one that this is a health food store. I know that's difficult for some people to believe, given a lot of the studies and things that have come out about red meat and meat consumption on the whole. But, hey, you know what? I'm not a spring chicken. I'm 36 years old. And I feel pretty damn good, actually.
You put a few forkfuls in your mouth through that time.
Yes, I have. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think what I'd like to do, we're right here at the half hour at 8 o'clock here in Pacific time. Let's take a quick break. Let the listeners grab something to eat or drink and come back.